This is part 2 of Richard Day's speech from 1969.
He talked about inducing heart attacks as a form of assassination. He said another very interesting thing was heart attacks. There's now a way to simulate a real heart attack that can be used as a method of assassination. Only a very skilled pathologist who knew exactly what to look for in an autopsy could distinguish this from the real thing. Now, Dr. Dunnigan said he thought it was shocking and surprising to hear this from that particular man. But he said, it stood out sharply in his memory. Now, it did ring a bell with me because I remember during the invasion of Iraq, the whole weapons of mass destruction thing and the 15-minute claim, there were two prominent Labour politicians, Tony Banks and the former Foreign Secretary Robin Cook, both Labour. They stood out very strongly against it. It wasn't long after that Robin Cook died of a sudden stroke and Tony Banks died of a sudden heart attack. It always struck in my mind that those deaths were slightly suspicious, and reading that, those two names jumped into my head and I thought of them. He also talked that people could choose to look after themselves. It would be more and more difficult to keep healthy, given in mind the food available and the host of unhealthy foods that would be so easy for people to eat. But he said people could eat right and exercise right, and the more intelligent, enlightened person would. And he said the less intelligent people would pig out kind of on McDonald's, wouldn't bother to exercise. The lazy and slovenly people would therefore die quicker deaths, and they would die out because they wouldn't look after themselves. So that was key. So he said the high salt, high-fat diets would almost be imposed on people and made the easy option, so that people would have to be very proactive and disciplined in order to avoid getting diseases as a result of those. But he said ignorant people would ignore health advice and just go on eating whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted, and not exercising, and that would also help kind of weed their gene pool out. You see, they think of everything. And then he talked about people wanting to plant a garden in the backyard and how people would be discouraged to do that, because it would be said, there are all sorts of hazardous conditions that might arise if you grow your own food. So people were to be discouraged from doing that sort of thing. In connection with nutrition, he also mentioned that public eating places would rapidly increase. So we saw obviously the proliferation of KFC, McDonald's, Burger King going worldwide. He said not only would this promote bad health and poor eating standards, but it also had a connection to the family. As more and more people ate out, eating at home and as a family unit, and that important mealtime where families come together would be less and less relevant, because everyone would just be interested in eating their convenience foods, which of course are hazardous to your family life and hazardous to your health. So he talked about religion. So let's go on to that one. He said there was an attempt to blend all religions. Old religions would have to go. He said religion itself is not necessarily bad, and a lot of people seem to need it with its mysteries and rituals. So there will be a religion. But the major religions of today will have to be changed because they are not compatible with the New World Order and the changes to come. So old religions will have to go, and he cited especially Christianity. He said once the Roman Catholic Church is brought down, the rest of Christianity will follow easily. Then, he said, a new religion can be accepted for all over the world, and it will incorporate something from the old ones to make it easier for people to accept and feel at home with. He said most people won't be concerned about religion, so the changes there won't affect them. Well, if you think about it, the Quran has elements of Judaism, quite a lot of elements, and elements of Christianity, because it accepts that those did go before. So it's possible that might be a version of Islam. Now, some people say Wahhabism is a fake version of Islam. Maybe that is the new religion in which we're all going to be incorporated under. I don't know. So he goes on to say that there would be an effort to change keywords and key texts in the Bible. So he said it wouldn't be obvious. You'd have to know the Bible extremely well to have known what was changed. And he said it wouldn't be obvious changing, but it would be shades of words, shades of phraseology. There would be constant revisions of biblical texts every time with slightly a different shading until eventually the whole color was different. And it would happen over time, and only people who were really alert to the scriptures would actually notice. He said in many cases just key words would be replaced by other words and a new meaning would emerge from the text. See how subtle they are. So they, even people who are following the Bible, they might be reading something totally different to what was there 30 years ago. And those interpretations might be far more in line with what the New World Order wanted them to think. So he said, far from stopping this, churches would actually help. And I think you guys can see that now. Pope is totally on board with all the woke agendas, isn't he? So in that case, I'd say he's definitely helping. So let's go on to education. He said education should be used as a tool of indoctrination. I don't think any of you guys need any convincing on that one. That certainly has been happening. But what's important, he said, the classics in literature would be changed. Just like they want to change the Bible. Certain wording and phraseology would be changed in all the classics in order to change their meaning. And no one would even suspect. Someone would have to go through it word by word to even recognize that any change was made. This also rang a bell because I know on Morgoth's Review, he did a vlog a couple of months back where he talked about classics, particularly Dickens novels and other things like that, were just being chucked out, thrown in garbage bins, almost deleted from libraries. So there's almost a wisdom, possibly a conservatism, conservative message in those books that they want to get rid of. And so those books were slowly just disappearing from libraries, along with the mystique, the mysteries, the important messages within them. So he said kids would spend a lot more time in school, but they wouldn't learn anything. We all know that's happening. Obviously, there would be better schools in better areas, and those kids would get a far more rounded education and a much better education. He said people would begin to think of vacation all time round the year, not just in summer. And so kids would take a lot longer to complete their education because of all the gap years and all the distractions, all their spring breaks, all that sort of thing going on. And at the end of their education, it would not be very concentrated. It would be so diluted, so jumbled in with all these holidays that they really wouldn't have learned anything valuable at all. And he said in most cases, after university, there'd have to be some sort of further qualifications to do because all that time had actually been wasted. I think we can see that happening in a lot of professions. I mean, you go to university and then you got a job, they retrain you totally, and you're back at college, back where you started learning it all again. He also talked about people having to decide at a younger and younger age what they'd want to do and what they'd want to study, so they could kind of get on a single track. I think when you have a lot of experiences, you're more broad-minded, you're probably more open to forming your own narrative rather than having a narrative forced on you. But if you are forced from a very young age at school to specialize in one particular narrow vein, that really helps produce the compartmentalization by which it's far easier to control society because everyone is so focused on their narrow little section of work or of life, and it's not even their career, it's a subsection of their career that they really don't see the bigger picture, and it's far harder for people to make linkages. He also said there would be control over who has access to information. So what does this mean? He means that he was saying that kids, in addition to their academic needs, would have to do loads of activities. So it wouldn't be enough to do well at school. You'd have to be kind of the prefect, the head of the basketball team. You'd have to be on the swim team. You have to do drama class. And all of this would make people burn out a lot more quickly. And it would produce a huge amount of pressure on students. And it would also, they said, sort the wheat from the chaff. Now, I think that probably could have happened anyway without their intervention. But he did say as well, due to this high pressure, a lot of kids would begin to have mental health problems, and that would almost take them out of the system or make them much easier to control. So in terms of limiting information, because so many kids would be so pressurized or spread so thin because they were being forced to be a jack of all trades, master of one, it would discourage anyone from really getting to grips with any particular field, and then therefore only very select few would become more expert in certain veins. So he also says education would be lifelong. Adults would constantly be sent for retraining just to keep up. Nothing would remain static in any career. And I think we all see that in many careers now. He said that would also help weed out people that were getting too old or too past it because they wouldn't be able to keep up with the constant exams and training. I think I already mentioned some books would disappear from libraries, so I won't do that one again. He talks about changing laws like Sunday trading rules, Sunday activities, gambling laws, all sorts of things like that. I think that's just evolution, would have happened anyway. But he also said it was to create this constant change and disruption, and to get rid of any routines or rituals or traditions within society. He talked about the changing of antitrust laws, and there was some statement that in a sense competition would be increased, but this increased competition would be within otherwise controlled circumstances. So it wouldn't really be free competition. And Dr. Dunnigan says he had the impression it was like competition among members of a club. So no one outside the club would be able to compete, but within the club there would be, from the outside looking in, a semblance of competition. He also said they would encourage drug abuse, alcohol abuse, to create a jungle atmosphere. So drug use would certainly be increased, alcohol would be encouraged, and it would also sort the weak from the stronger. But it would also create certain deprived areas of degradation where people would, so whole communities would fall further and further behind because of alcohol abuse, not only by themselves but within their family. So he said, to create confusion, on the surface level, they would be discouraging alcohol use. But on the, like I said, there was two agendas. There's what they're doing at the surface level, and then there's what they're really doing. And what they really were going to be doing was promoting alcohol. They also wanted to promote drunk driving as a problem, so they could introduce all sorts of stricter rules to control drivers, excuses to pull you over, breathalyze, whatever. Then he went to talk on about restrictions on travel. I think we can see some of this coming in now with the COVID. He said not everyone should be free to travel the way they do now. People don't have a need to travel. It's a privilege. And that was kind of the way they put it, that would have to end. People just jumping in their car, taking journeys, taking plane trips, just being free and easy to go places they wanted would have to change. And I think that's definitely an agenda that hasn't been fulfilled because, there's been a proliferation of travel. But with COVID, we see quite a different story, don't we? He said there'd be need for more and more jails and more mental hospitals, and more and more people were locked up. So again, he talks about the importance of change, that nothing would be permanent. They'd rename streets, rename suburbs, repurpose buildings. There'd be these ever-present changes. Everything that had become familiar to people would be changed so it was no longer familiar. Certain buildings in certain areas of town would be allowed to stand empty and deteriorate. Streets would be allowed to rot in certain localities. And he said they would also build inferior products, like bridges would be made that would collapse after a while, and there'd be more accidents involving aeroplanes and land railroads and automobiles. And it was all to create more fear and uncertainty in society. So people didn't feel that they could trust all the infrastructure and the things they once relied on. He mentioned how certain areas of town would be very well maintained, but not all parts. There would be slums, and they would go out of their way to create slums, while other areas would be partially well maintained. So that meant that if people escaped the slums and they came to civilization, they'd be very proud of their accomplishments and their achievements, and they would have no sympathy for those who were left behind. Do you know that sort of phrase, I'll pull up the drawbridge after me kind of thing? Or, get they were trying to encourage a dog-eat-dog kind of mentality where people claw their way up, crawl over broken glass to get where they want to go, and then they don't want to help anyone else up after them. So the strongest people would probably get out of slum situations, but then they wouldn't want, once they got there, they wouldn't really want to help other people get out. So I think that's encouraging a very selfish society and a breakdown of community spirit as well. He was also said that they would encourage criminality so they could have an excuse to invest more and more in the police, so that they could have those structures there, those police structures, so they would be able to exert control, especially if the more, law-abiding elements of society started to become a little bit restless and to resist. The police would be there in their numbers, able to kind of shut them down. So he talked as well about the whole proliferation of a new industry of residential security systems, alarms, locks, armed guards, all those sort of things. So there was an effort to create crime, and so they could create industries that would profit out of the crime as well. He said, see, we're generating all this crime, but look how good we are. We're also generating the means for you to protect yourself against the crime. So again, it's the ostensible reason on the top and the underlying reason on the bottom. Now, this is very important because we see now the threats of global interdependence, and a lot of us Brexiteers had already warned of this. So he says to create a new structure, you first have to tear down the old. Yes, we see that has been happening with our society. Very often, cultural Marxists use certain minority groups. They're not interested in those minorities, but they use them as a battering ram to destroy institutions, to destroy traditions, and to break down culture and society and establishment so that they can build a whole new society as they want it. So he said to create a new structure, you first have to tear down the old. Exactly. What did he want to tear down? American industry. So it was the first time that this Dr. Dunnigan said he'd heard the term global interdependence. The stated plan was that different parts of the world would be assigned different roles in industry and commerce, and a unified global system would be created. I think we see the EU as a testing ground for that. You know, France have the agriculture, Germany have the industry, make the cars, UK has the banking. They want to roll that out worldwide so that every country is so specialized that we're interdependent. And now you can see, a thing like COVID strikes, it's great to be independent because you don't have to have, because with borders closed and with supply routes cut, you need to be able to source things from within your own country. So he said again, the continued preeminence of the United States and the relative independence and self-sufficiency of the United States would have to be changed. This was one of several occasions where he said that in order to create a new structure, you have to tear down the old, and American industry would have to be torn down. We saw that with Maggie Thatcher tearing down British industry, British steel, British shipbuilding, British mining. They've done the same in America. They're still trying to do it. Obviously, Donald Trump came in, make America great. He wanted to start up the mining, coal mines, the oil industry again, but it's in total contravention of this plan, which is a worldwide plan. So he said America basically had to be brought down to give other countries a chance to build up their industries, because otherwise they'd never be able to compete against the United States, particularly in the heavy industries, which should be cut back and developed in other countries, particularly Japan. He doesn't mention China there, but yeah, well, I mean, you do want to give other countries a chance, but the idea of capitalism is that, you know, it's not one or the other. Everyone can succeed together. He said patriotism would go down the drain. Okay, guys, we all know that. Us Brexiteers, we know people see themselves as European, not British. Americans, a lot of them feel ashamed of being American, right? So then there was a discussion at that point about steel and particularly the automobile industries. And Dr. Dunnigan said that the guy said automobiles would be imported from Japan on an equal footing with domestically produced automobiles, but the Japanese product would be better. Things in America would be made so that they break and fall apart, and people could say, wow, you know, our industry is going to pot, let's import it from Japan. They make things much better over there. And he said it would be almost created so that people would prefer things that were imported, and there'd be this impression that made in America wasn't great anymore, and it would give a boost to the foreign competitors. So you can see there the purposeful running down of American industry. And I think that you can see some of the thing. I mean, I remember people saying that Rover, cars that were made in the UK, was such a rubbish brand, you know, let's get rid of them. The Germans make such better cars. British Leyland, that also went to pot. So you can see a similar thing. Maybe it wasn't the fact that Rover were such bad cars. Maybe they were purposely made to be rubbish so that the automobile industry in the UK could be run down and shipped on out. So he said people would become disgruntled with their Ford, their GM or their Chrysler product, and they'd prefer a foreign product. So the American car industry would go downhill. He said patriotism about buying American would give way to practicalities. If you bought Japanese, German, or imported, it would last longer and be better. Another way patriotism was going to go down the drain. He mentioned that elsewhere in the economy things would also fall apart. He mentioned specific items that Dr. Dunnigan didn't recall. But he said he had the impression of, you know, things would fall apart in order that you constantly have to replace them to create this consumerism. So the next was loss of jobs and loss of security. And the idea was to promote insecurity. It was no longer to be such thing as a job for life. So he said America would be kept strong on information communications, high technology, education, and agriculture, and it would still be the keystone of the global system, but heavy industry would be transported out. He said mainly because of the environmental damage, and he said that would be hyped up with some setbacks, industrial waste, a lot more reporting on pollution. People would get fed up with it, and they would support the rundown of the heavy industries and the exporting of those industries out. Next, he went back to population shifts in order to eliminate traditions. So, of course, along the line, there was talk of people losing their jobs because of a result of industrial policy, but then there'd be opportunities for retraining and relocation. People would move away from the country into the towns. As you know, people would be further away from their roots. Of course, there'd be a lot of people moving across borders because freedom of movement, freedom of capital. Capital is moving around, people are moving around, people lose touch with their roots, with their traditions, with their families, they embrace new traditions, or perhaps none at all, or perhaps people become nomadic. And I think that was generally meant because a nomadic population with no roots, much easier to control. They say a tree with no roots will blow over in the first storm. But a tree with roots can stay there for many, many, many centuries. So it was important to have a rootless society because those people are so much easier to move around. Along with people seeing themselves as global citizens, you'd also have global sports. And he talked at length here about the American sports like baseball, ice hockey, American football kind of being phased out and people becoming more interested in international sports like soccer. I don't think that really happened. People are still incredibly interested in the American sports. So that's probably one of these things where they have actually failed. But maybe there's also been an element of the American sports being exported out of America too. One of the upshots that was going to be sold of this global interdependence would be that national identities would be de-emphasized. Each area would depend on every other area or another element in its life, and we would all become citizens of the world rather than citizens of any one country. And along these lines, our interests would merge, our cultures would merge, traditions would merge, and there'd be far less difference between any countries, which would, of course, promote people moving between countries. It would be so much more easy to do because everything would become so standardized. Because this whole cult, they don't like differences. They just want one amorphous blob where we are really just numbers. We don't have a cultural identity. We don't have a sexual identity. We lose our independence by having things like maybe universal basic income because we can't earn money with much regularity. They're destroying a job for life. So you don't really have a career identity either. So all forms of identity are absolutely under attack.
Next follows part 3, which is part of another blog, and that's probably the climax of the whole speech with the most revealing revelations.